Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Whilst we're waiting for the official start time, we're just going to let everyone join, and I'll just start explaining a little bit about the webinar. So I'm Elena Creedy, I'm the Head of Customer Success at MUSO, and I oversee our relationships with customers and also manage the day-to-day relationship with quite a few of our customers. I'm hosting this webinar today, and we just want to allow a few minutes for people to join before we start the presentation. So for the next minute or so, I'm just going to explain how the webinar will work. So the rough agenda for today is that IPG will do a brief introduction, my MUSO colleagues will introduce themselves, and then we'll delve into the presentation. A recorded version of this webinar will be available via the IPG YouTube website. For those of you just joining, welcome to today's webinar. So we're using Zoom for today's webinar, which hopefully most people are familiar with. We envisage that the webinar will go for about 30 minutes, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions. We'd love to hear from you. So if you'd like to ask any questions, please enter these into the Q&A section, and we'll try to answer all of the questions at the end of the presentation. However, if we're not able to answer questions due to time constraints, and if you've not asked the question anonymously, then we will respond to your question directly via email. We will be running a poll at the start of the webinar and appreciate everyone participating in this. And as I mentioned before, the webinar is being recorded, and anyone who registered will receive a link to access the recording, and the webinar recording will also be shared via the IPG YouTube channel. So we're about a sort of minute or so in. So just a final welcome to everyone who's recently joined the webinar. I think, are we sort of happy now to hand over to...
I think so. Thank you so much, Elena. That's wonderful. And hello to everyone. We know everyone is time poor, so joining us right now is wonderful, and we know this is going to be extremely informative. Thank you to the MUSO team for organising this, and thank you also to my colleague Imogen, who's our head of partnerships, who's worked with MUSO, and I think this will be really valuable for all of us to listen. So before I hand back over to the team, I think it's not too late to say Happy New Year to everyone. Over to you, Elena.
Thank you. So now my colleagues Tom and Daisy, who are running the presentation, will introduce themselves.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name's Tom. I am the Commercial Director of Content Protection at MUSO. So my focus is wholly on anti-piracy. I've worked for about 10 years in this industry across software, film, gaming, publishing, film and TV. So yeah, I'm really nice to be here today and excited to show you what we've got in store. I'll hand you over to Daisy now.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. I'm Daisy, and nice to meet you all. I work alongside Tom at MUSO, working on the SME side of content protection, and I also work with our roster of authors very closely. So I've got a lot of insight to share with you, and really, really great to see you all here.
Great. Thank you, Tom and Daisy. Now, to kickstart the webinar, we're going to run a quick poll. So you'll see that come up on your screen now, and we'd appreciate everyone responding to it. It's just 2 questions where we just want to understand what knowledge everyone has that's attending about what you know already about digital book piracy, and also to understand how much piracy is impacting your businesses. Now, while the poll is running, Tom's going to talk you through the agenda in a bit more detail, and then we'll come back to the results.
Yes, thank you, Elena. So whilst that's going on in the background, what we'll do is we'll kick off with some trends, specifically looking at the UK. So that's looking at unlicensed websites. And after we've done that, I'll take you through sort of why it's important to protect your books. Daisy and I will look at the proactive measures that are available to you. That's not necessarily just using a vendor, so we'll give you some tips as well. And then we want to talk a bit more about how you can leverage a vendor effectively. Now I realise there will be Q&A session, so please save questions for the end, or feel free to type them in the chat box as Elena has said. So yeah, looking forward to taking you through that. Is the poll finished, Elena, or do you need?
Yeah, we can end the poll and I'll now share the results. Okay, can everyone see that? Can you see that on your screen, Tom?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just looking through it now. That's really interesting. So it's quite a broad range. On the first question, it's quite equal. Some experience, I'd expect that. And then on the second question, yeah, that makes sense. That's good. My predictions were kind of right in my head. So thank you all for participating in that poll. It's very helpful. I feel like we know you a bit better now, although we can't see you. So I will crack on with the presentation. I'm just going to reshare my screen. Here we go. So yeah, so just a little bit about MUSO. We are a data company and we're also a content protection provider. So we started out in content protection over 13 years ago, actually representing the music industry, hence our name. We've expanded since then into publishing, working with authors, and we also work with much larger companies, both providing piracy data and also content protection services. Our data is trusted, as you can see, by some large organizations. It's used quite a lot in policy making to understand, the trends in piracy and how to think about new policies or legislation. So the EU IPO and WIPO are big advocates for our data, which is great. And yeah, we are also working across different sectors, as I've mentioned. So I think, the advantage for us is that we get to experience copyright infringement across all sectors. We get to share knowledge across those and improve, iterate our product offering. So that's really a great advantage for us. So just kicking off with the trends, we have got a database of piracy websites, which we've had since 2017. Every day we are tracking brand new websites and we are classifying them according to the type of piracy that is on the site. So whether that's film, TV, software, publishing. We're also going further and looking at specific categories, which I'll come to. But we're also looking at the type of piracy in terms of whether it's a download link, which is called a cyber locker, or a direct download file, and torrent files as well. So it's a huge database of websites, hundreds of thousands. And what this table here is showing is some stats from the last 3 years, including 2023. I've set the date range to January to November, just so you know, because we didn't have complete data in December 23 yet, which we analysed it a month later. But as you can see, just a simple trend that we're seeing this increase in the number of visits to piracy websites, and this is just for the UK alone. To be honest, piracy is growing across all sectors. In terms of the number of visits to those websites. But again, I'm just going to bring it to the next slide because I think there's a bit more of an interesting story with this next chart. So we obviously, in that last chart, we were looking at the total number of visits. What we're actually showing here is the trend in the UK when it comes to the different categories that we measure within publishing. And I realized that these categories may not necessarily represent, be specific to what you're used to. But what the data is telling us here is that we've got, manga at the top in terms of share of total. It's almost 50% in 2021, which means, of all piracy that MUSO is measuring and the visits to those sites, 50% of the traffic is to manga-based websites, which is significant. You can also see publishing content, book content, sites that have purely have books, web fiction, educational as well. Now, it's really important to understand when looking at this type of data, not to think, okay, there's only 1.75% of piracy is educational. That's not a measure of volume. It just shows that of the total amount of piracy we're measuring, we're only seeing 1.75% share in the educational sector. That doesn't mean to say there's a low amount of piracy, and it could be increasing. So this next one is looking at 2022, and again, it's just now we're starting to see that manga content is going up. And again, there's been a slight drop in the total share with publishing, books and other contents have gone down. And that is purely because the websites that we're tracking, which are the top global websites, more are manga based in terms of that are in that top sphere. Essentially, it kind of shows, where is there a demand for that type of content? It's growing in that sense. In 2023, again, just to finish off the most recent view, manga is 61%. So, again, we're seeing that incline go up, but you can see that it's kind of plateaued a bit. So it'll be interesting to see, is that going to continue to dominate the top piracy websites in our data set, or will we see something else emerge over time? Happy again to, throughout with all this data, have separate conversations if you want to dive into a bit more detail. But I just wanted to start with that overview. So moving on to more around content protection, it's a question is, maybe this is a simple answer for some people, but also maybe a lot of people aren't sure, but why bother protecting your books? I think the first thing that we think about with our customers and we've experienced ourselves is that, there's an emotional investment and a lot of time spent on creating a book from the author. So, that in itself carries a lot of need to protect it once it's published. After that process, you've got to create the content itself and make it into a finished product. That is, I'm generalizing here, but essentially all publishers have to invest heavily in their different resources, whether it's people, partners, running their businesses. And so this is obviously much, much higher in terms of money that's invested here. So again, another reason why, to tackle piracy infringement. And lastly, the third sort of general step that I've thought about here is more around the promotion and making money from that content. So, marketing, making a return on that investment. You've got to hedge your bets on this content doing well. So you're going to invest where you think you should on promoting the content and the books. And at the same time, piracy is stealing that promotion essentially. So they're leveraging what you're doing and they're monetizing in their own way your content, which is again another reason why we need to think about content protection. So it's important, from my perspective, to think about it as the opposite as well. So what is the impact of not protecting your book or your content? So author and stakeholder relationships, I mentioned this, is the initial start of the process, as you know. Well, authors are emotionally invested in what they're doing. They spend a lot of time working. Stakeholders are important to publishers. So, using anti-piracy solutions or proactively dealing with piracy infringement can help maintain and improve those relationships. And if you weren't bothered about protecting your content, it could tarnish your brand reputation. People are vocal now, especially on social media. If something is talked negatively about your brand, it could impact how you work going forward. And then obviously book sales is more of a direct impact. So, we often see frustrated authors saying that, they're not getting enough sales, but they're seeing their books everywhere on Google. So again, we'll talk more about those issues. But but another reason why, if you're not going to bother protecting it, that could impact your book sales. And then the emotional impact in general. I think, piracy, Daisy and I know that piracy is one of those topics that is on the radar quite a lot, but it's not necessarily one that you want to be addressing. It's maybe one that you find challenging to address, because it could be expensive for you, but also, it's just a headache. Perhaps it's difficult to get your head around it. So that's why I think, by not protecting your book, you can sort of continue to feel like that going forward. So let's look at like the route to protecting your books and when you should think about it. The front list is, as I understand, where we are releasing new books, new products, and during that sort of tail end of the process where you're getting submissions and you're editing, designing, producing, and promoting that. Really, that's when you want to be thinking about anti-piracy solutions for those books, because there's always a risk associated with those processes. You're handing that documentation around. We've seen in the past early leaks, scripts from film shows, but also submissions appear online, which again, that can be a real frustration. And if you don't have something in place, a process you can lean upon, then it just means that you're having to focus on something new at that point. So we always try and get that preparation piece in first. The front list is also probably where you are investing a lot in your a lot of resource in the promotion of that new content. But then we've also got the backlist, which is where the volume of content exists. So that's a different approach in our experience. So most publishers will consider this by revenue, to be honest. They'll look at where is their revenue coming from, and what do they want to maintain that revenue? How do they want to maintain that revenue? And they'll spend some money on protecting their content. But there's also the other aspect, which is what are you promoting within the backlist? Books are very different to TV shows and films, more so films, because they don't have necessarily a huge peak and a drop in piracy over time. It can re-peak based on lots of factors. Piracy data can be a really useful tool to understand what is happening to your content. And as I've said before, MUSO is also measuring the volume of piracy based on piracy websites in the UK and globally. But we also have the ability to look at specific titles in our system where possible. So that could be a good telltale sign. So addressing piracy in the approach, there are three ways. The first for me is the DIY approach, because it's not always feasible to get a vendor in. There is a self-service option. I can't speak for other vendors, but we've definitely got a self-service option. It's available via our website, where authors or publishers can sign up themselves. And we'll talk a little bit about the differences. And then you've got something more comprehensive, which is where you're outsourcing the work completely and getting a managed service from a vendor like MUSO. So I think it'd be more interesting for you to understand how we would remove content. And, for those of you that do want to consider a DIY approach, this could be quite useful. So in terms of how you remove piracy infringements, as soon as you find a link online, you've got to identify where that's come from. Maybe it's come from an author or a stakeholder or a partner. It's really important to go straight into that website and try and find where is there a contact for sending a notice. So it says DMCA somewhere on that website. It's usually at the bottom of the website, and it's usually very, very small. It may be in other sections of the website, but have a look, see if you can find where there's a DMCA contact or agent. Then you need to think about what you're going to send them, because the notice itself needs to be in a lot of websites will push back if it's not referencing the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And you can just Wikipedia that and search online for a template. It's important to just think about these steps when you're going to send a notice, because it's your time that you're investing in it. So you want to get it right if you can. So once you've sent that notice, think about the follow-up steps. Put a note in your diary for a week's time. The thing about anti-piracy is it's not a perfect science. We have a dedicated team that do this process day in, day out, and we have automation to help scale it up. But if you're doing it yourself, you've got to think about, how am I going to process this in the best way possible? My tip would be not to hound the website, because again, they're an illegal website most of the time, and they're not really bothered about taking stuff down. But if there's a bit of consideration, and usually there's a person at the other side of this, then if you build a relationship, I put that in inverted commas, with the site, they may listen to you a bit quicker. And lastly, think about the next step you can take, which is something MUSO does, and we report every link to Google for delisting. You can do that yourself quite easily. I personally haven't done it, but that's kind of, again, a big part of what we're doing is automatically sending a link to Google for delisting that we found elsewhere. And what this does is reduce the visibility of that. So just to kind of round up, obviously, the pros of working on yourself and doing it yourself is that you can react quickly, you can learn from that experience, and there isn't a direct cost associated with it. Whereas on the flip side, it is time consuming potentially. Hopefully that process is going to speed it up. It is going to be challenging to scale. You're not going to be able to actually tackle the problem in a proactive way. You'll be quite reactive, but that could be sufficient. And it can be an unwanted distraction. We understand that most publishers and most businesses don't have a dedicated person working on anti-piracy, so it's about keeping your focus on what you're doing best, which is promoting, creating, and distributing content. So let's look a little bit about MUSO now, and this is a plug, a little bit towards you guys, because we have a great product that we'd love to show you. In terms of the value that we can bring, it's really, again, I've summarized it in 3 ways, but the first way is ease and scalability. So when we talk about ease, often it's quite cumbersome thinking about anti-piracy, because you think, I need to get these certain files over to them, I need to think about security, I need to vet them, and onboarding could be quite challenging. But we make it very, very simple. We use metadata to search for your content. So all we need is the title and the author and the year it's released. We can accept that via a CSV, or we can accept it title by title over email, or we can connect with your Onyx provider even. So there's a lot of possibilities there to make it quite seamless. And then it's about that scalability factor. If you think back to the backlist and the volumes of content that publishers have, we're very used to dealing with high volumes, and we've built a very scalable solution, which means that we can tackle those on a continual automatic basis. Daisy will talk a little bit more about the solutions, but in terms of the additional value that we're able to bring, it is like, if I go back to the start of the presentation, we've been working this for 13 years. We've been doing this day in, day out. It's our bread and butter. We're experts in what we do. So what you're leveraging when you work with us is that expertise. And often when we bring new customers on, there's a learning curve. They are trying to understand more about piracy. We're trying to make sure they understand the expectations around what is possible and what isn't possible. And I always talk about this with customers. It's not a perfect science. So communication is often quite high to begin with. But over time, that drops off, and you understand where the service sits and how effective we can be. And lastly, we bring the data piece to the table. So we looked at some big general data stats, but of the UK and trends in piracy. It could be very useful for you to see what the trends are, because it could help you consider, more commercial decisions and strategic decisions around what your business is doing based on what the demand and the reaction is in the piracy network. we do this. We're starting to do it more within publishing, but certainly within film and television, we've been providing this data as a demand data set on a title by title basis for a number of years. I'd be happy to sort of walk through anyone who's interested in that. So one of the other elements that we can bring to the table, which is a nifty tool, and it's something that I love that we have and we give customers, is we enable them all to submit an infringement anywhere, anytime via our dashboard. So often these are the frustrating points when you have an author or a partner who's sending you a link. You can just copy and paste that into our dashboard, link it with the campaign that's running, and then in the background we will do our work. We will find the right person to send the notice to and get the notice sent. Now, if we've already established a takedown process and ideally we've automated that, it could be seamless that whole process is happening in the background, and we'll feed that information back to you within the reports that you can access. So again, trying to make it very easy for you to just get on with your work, really. Oops. Sorry. So in terms of the services, I'm going to hand over to Daisy now, and she'll talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. Yes, so I just wanted to take you through some pointers for picking the right vendor. Apologies, this wouldn't apply to anyone wanting to take the DIY approach, but for those who do want to look into a vendor, just wanted to give you some insight into picking the correct one for you. So firstly, budget and ROI. Obviously, the million-dollar question about ROI and budget is obviously a key factor when you're weighing up options, and the price obviously will have a direct impact on ROI. ROI within anti-piracy is notoriously difficult to measure. However, the way that we see it is that the risk to your sales and your reputation and the points that Tom mentioned earlier, when you don't have a process in place, will almost always outweigh the costs. So the way we like to see it is more of a risk benefit rather than ROI. Secondly, quality of the technology that the vendor are using. So it's really beneficial to do your due diligence on this, and look into the methodology behind the technology, and look and ask exactly how these sites, the piracy sites, are tested, how they're classified, how often compliance is tested as well. And of course, most importantly, how files and links are actually found, and how much automation is used in the process, and the removal process. So especially when you have lots of content that you want to protect, you need to make sure that the vendor has the ability to scale with you and your business. Thirdly, experience in sector and market. So it's important that a vendor has obviously experience in the publishing sector, as well as working closely with authors, because that's where the root of this is all coming from, and that's who we're trying to support. But don't get too lost in making sure that the vendor works with a publisher identical to yours. Maybe you're an educational publisher, and don't get too sort of bogged down in that detail. As long as they have the progressive technology, they'll be able to cater to any publisher and any sector, really. And in terms of market, it is obviously useful to have a vendor who understands the nuances and the trends within, the local sphere, like the UK, for example. Fourthly, AI components. Obviously, AI is such a buzzword at the moment. It's an ever-changing phenomenon, and it's increasingly important for any of your outsourced kind of partners, especially in the technology and data space, to integrate AI in order to optimize their processes. So a bit of a plug here, but for example, MUSO uses AI in multiple different ways, and we're really investing into this space, and it's something that's growing every quarter. But just what we're doing at the moment is we're using AI to discover and identify new piracy sites. Really important, because piracy sites are kind of popping up all the time. They can be shut down and then they can reappear under a different name. So it's something that AI can really help to keep on top of. We use text matching algorithms. So this helps identify the content. And thirdly, we use AI to status check piracy pages to make sure that the content has actually been removed. So when that DMCA is accepted and they remove the file, we use AI to make sure that we check that it has actually been removed, rather than, you know, someone going and checking that themselves. So it makes everything a lot quicker, a lot smoother, and reliable. And then lastly, the level of service and support, obviously really important whenever you're picking a vendor for anything. It's key to a long-term partnership. And whenever you have a leak, for example, you know, a book, one of your maybe high value releases is somehow appears on the internet, you need a vendor that understands urgency, and you need someone that is available, you know, on weekends and has lots of different customer success and customer support components. So yeah, that's that slide. And then just lastly from me, just wanted to run you through how MUSO can help and some of our kind of success rates, because this is something, these are all factors that come across a lot in our conversations with publishers. So just wanted to answer some of these questions that you may have already. So when it comes to success rates in removing content, really varies on firstly the sector, but secondly the content itself and where we find it. So across our entire business, Google delisting is at a 97% success rate, and then file removal it really depends, but we did some research, we looked back at 2023 and we had on average an 88% success rate on file removal. Obviously file removal does depend on the compliance of the site, but compliance is ever changing. So a site that was compliant maybe last year may become non-compliant this year, or vice versa, and it's something that your vendor and MUSO need to keep on top of all the time. It's something we need to retest to make sure that we can remove the content for you. Obviously easy and quick setup, as Tom, I'm not going to go through that too much. Tom mentioned we can take in a feed of all your content, and I think it's important to say we can also protect, you know, 1 or 2 titles for you. It doesn't have to be thousands, it doesn't have to be all of your backlist. If you want to just start with a few of your top performing titles, then that's something we can do as well. And I think really importantly is this preservation of your internal resources. So time, I know some of you mentioned in the poll that this is one of your main responsibilities. So I think you've got to think, wow, we could really save the time of that individual and what could they be doing instead? It's not really a service you have to constantly be checking up on. You can kind of rest assured that once the content is actually being protected, that you don't have to keep, you know, checking. You can kind of let it run in the background for you and you can focus on other things. And then obviously a really key point as well is this value add for your authors. So when you're working with maybe new authors, you can mention we actually do have a piracy protection process in place, and that could be really attractive for authors. We work with, I think it was mentioned at the beginning, almost 1,000 authors directly, and they are very, very stressed about this. This is, you know, this is their life's work in a lot of situations. So they take it very seriously. It could be quite upsetting. And I think, as some of you mentioned, you've had authors send you links. So I know you all can imagine and you all know how stressful that can be. So this can take away that stress and also help you get better partnerships with your authors in the future. And then we always offer a wide range of add-ons, bespoke packages. So if you're a slightly bigger company and you need something bespoke, we can always work with you on that. And as I said, if you're very small and you've got a lower budget, we're always happy to talk and happy to discuss that. And then, as Tom mentioned, you could submit your infringement. So whenever an author sends you, and this doesn't just have to be on piracy sites, this could be on Facebook, for example. If, you know, an author spots a comment on Facebook with a link to their content, they can submit it, or you can submit it on their behalf via the dashboard, and we can get that removed for you. And then lastly, it's a very comprehensive dashboard, and we've got reporting tools so that you can assess quarterly or annually on the progress, and you can also download reports and share them internally or with your author if needs be. And that's everything from me.
Great, thank you, Daisy. That's it. That wraps it up. I think we've gone quite good on time. Hopefully, it's been very useful. I realise that there's a lot more to dive into. So, if there are any questions now, we'd be happy to answer those here. Feel free to type them through to us. If not, and just reach out if you have any questions. If you don't get a chance to ask or we don't answer it today. But thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks everyone. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions here in the Q&A. So the first one is asking, what is the publishing category as opposed to books?
Yes, so that's a good question. So in our data set, we classify books as any kind of physical book that is then digital copies of it, and publishing is any published content. So it's a broader range and not so specific.
Great, thank you. The next question is, can you please provide the Google contact or email to send them the piracy link?
Yeah, I reckon we can find out a link. There's a whole part of the website actually that has the process and the forms. So yeah, we can share that with Imogen and Bridget afterwards, and you can get that, no problem.
Fantastic. The next question, can we show more details how to report links in the MUSO dashboard? And do we need to sign up with MUSO to be able to do this? And what is the cost for that? So maybe explain a little bit about both of those.
Yeah, so as Daisy's mentioned, it's probably best to have a chat to understand what the needs are, but we can offer the dashboard in multiple ways. So if you want to look at submitting, I will say, and I'll let Imogen talk a bit more, but we have a rate card in place for IPG members. So maybe that's something we could take advantage of and have a conversation on that. But yeah, I guess we're not, Daisy, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but we're not adverse to opening up the dashboard for submissions. And like Daisy said, we can actually work on a very small number of titles, so it may be quite a nominal cost initially for you. We'll share that rate card, and Imogen will talk about it.
Excellent. Next question, would MUSO check social media sites for infringements?
Yeah, sorry, Daisy, feel free to butt in if you want me. I'm happy to answer.
You go for
it. So yes, the answer is yes. As Daisy mentioned, we have separate modules that cover social media, any user-generated content sites. What our core offering is the automatic searching and removal across known piracy websites that we have from our database, and then we have Google delistings as well as part of that package. It's a highly automated service, quite easy to scale, but with the social media and UCC, they tend to be very bespoke in nature. So it really depends. I think there are about 30 different platforms that we've covered across social media. So just let us know what they are, and then we can quote based on. It's a slightly different approach as well, I should mention, in that it's more manual. So we have to have people actually doing that work in our team. We have an office in Romania who've been there for 8 years, 9 years. We have our own staff there, and they're fantastic. So once we know a bit more about the requirement, we can provide a quote based on that. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Okay, and a couple of more questions have come in around social media sites. So one is asking, is it possible for us to notify Facebook as well as Google of links to pirated content?
Yes, definitely. So there's some social media sites have the ability to share actual copies and files, but most are linking to a piracy website where it's obtainable for free. So what we would do is we can remove the comment, the post, or any actual content that's being hosted by a social media website. and generally they're 100% compliant because they are, you know, legitimate businesses that work. So they do want to actually enforce on copyright infringement. We've built relationships with those platforms because we're doing it on such a big scale. We've leveraged, worked on that relationship with those platforms to get better tooling. So I think that's, you know, again, one of the advantages that we could bring to the table, perhaps. Other than
And
that,
how easy would it be for then if a publisher wanted to try and do that themselves, though?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, sorry, Daisy. You
can report, if it's a comment, you can report the comment to Facebook if it has an illegal link in it. I think it's a bit of a longer process if the actual content itself is on Facebook. But yes, there is a way that you can do this yourself via Facebook. Just be ready for some forms and to go through a bit of a process. But yes, you can do it yourself.
Yeah, and just on that, sorry, there's one thing that we would advise is have a link to the original work that you're asking to be removed, because it helps speed up the process. So if there is an official landing page that you have on your website, or you know, through a seller, list that in usually there's a place to list it in a form, as Daisy mentioned. I think it's also worth mentioning that once a user has 3 strikes against them, in most cases and most platforms, especially Facebook, their account is actually blocked. So there is value in doing this work.
And just on that point about the link of original work, that's also needed for the Google delistings, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, another question on social media. Someone's asking if we're able to tackle Telegram channels, for example.
Yes. So Telegram it was a bit the Wild West. It's calmed down a bit now. They are compliant, but they can be quite time consuming when it comes to compliance. So there's a caveat there. What we would do is we can do our own research, again, assign using metadata based searches. We can go and find channels or look for specific areas of content, and we can enforce on the entire channel, or we can take down specific messages. But as Daisy mentioned, and as I'll just reiterate, you know, it's really important to manage expectations around that process of compliance. We obviously understand the route and we push on it on a daily basis, but you know, instant results, you know, may not be possible on some platforms. And I know that Telegram can be tough sometimes. But the more we have, the more we can push on them.
Exactly. Okay, another question. So do you also check institutional repositories, i.e. universities, where faculty and students upload content?
That's a good question. No, we don't. So I would say that it would be interesting to see if we could report it if anything's found, you know, leveraging our sort of processes around taking down any kind of content from anywhere. But in terms of finding and searching those types of links, we wouldn't proactively look on those faculties. Happy to chat more about that though, if you want to, because there could be some ways that we could broaden the service potentially.
Okay, and what sort of information do we need to set up the service? For example, do we need an ISBN?
Not an ISBN. It is not necessary in order to deliver the service. It's the thing we need is the title, the author, and the year of release. An original URL, as we've mentioned, when we're sending notices, is important. The ISBN could be useful for us in other ways, from reporting purposes, but in terms of actually delivering the services, we wouldn't need it.
Okay, and so what more can, like, the publishers, sort of, someone's asking, what can we do in our own companies?
Yeah, so hopefully the little tutorial on sending a notice has been helpful to speed up that, or kind of get more confidence in doing it yourself if you want to. I think using free tools such as Google Alerts could be a very nifty way of finding when piracy is occurring for your content or for your brand. Keeping an eye, so set up those alerts. You you can set up RSS feeds, and you can set them to come weekly or daily. And we often do that as well. We do offer free monitoring, which would be on a small scale. So if you're interested in just having a look, do contact us about that. We would happily put a few titles into our system and monitor to see what kind of piracy results are out there. That wouldn't involve any kind of notice sending. So it would just give you an idea of what the problem looks like. The other thing I was going to mention is, I guess, talking to your partners and stakeholders about what they're doing, because again, anti-piracy and piracy is a group effort. It's an industry-wide problem. You're all dealing with the same problem across the same sites, essentially, give or take. And so having those conversations with your partners and stakeholders could give you more ideas about how to sort of combat it together. It may even be worth exploring contractually how you want to sell your content, or whether you want to sell it with anti-piracy protection or not. Thinking about it from that standpoint, I think is beneficial. Hopefully that's useful anyway.
And one last question is, how are MUSO addressing AI issues?
It's the big question. So in directly addressing things like ChatGPT or those kind of AI platforms, we're not necessarily addressing those directly, just because of how we need to be able to find the content. And what we are doing though is we have been tackling websites that are notorious for being very popular in terms of published content. And taking down. So essentially what we're doing is indirectly tackling a source of piracy, for AI, if those AI algorithms are using that content illegally, which I'm very aware that there's a lot of legislative sort of action and progress happening in terms of trying to change legislation so that there is more ownership on those platforms to actually reimburse publishers. But yeah, I think we're keeping an eye on the technology. As Daisy said, we're using elements of it ourselves just to increase the service level and offer a better product. But as soon as that legislation changes, I will say that this was when Google existed early days and piracy existed, was very high, and they were quite non-compliant, to be honest, and very slow at taking down links on their webpage, on their search engine. And it took a real group effort and industry-wide collaboration to actually push on that. So I think, there is stuff happening. And as soon as that kind of, evolves, then, MUSO will look at a way in which we can ramp up and increase the service level.
Great. Oh, I think another question's just come in, sorry. Saying, not sure if I can ask this, but we suspect Amazon is a source of pirated content, not that they're pirating themselves. Is that a common experience?
Yeah, so it's been flagged with us through some of our authors, and there's multiple problems with the Amazon or marketplaces like Amazon, where there's sort of this impersonation aspect where people are impersonating an author and saying that they've got the book and they've got an illegal copy of the book. It's really tough, that piece. We can certainly jump in and help report those instances for you. We have, like Daisy says, we can customize our approach for you. So we can, like a social media module, we can assign work out to our team, and then we can report that via our dashboard. So it's totally possible to tackle those issues. But yes, unfortunately, that is a bit of a problem. I think it would be great to talk more about that and see if there's something more robust that we can set up as an offering, to be honest. So happy to have a conversation.
Great. Okay, so I think that's all the questions that have come in. So thank you, Tom and Daisy, for your time in completing the presentation. I'd just like to mention that here at MUSO, we're members of the IPG, so you'll be able to see us at events, or if you'd like to arrange to meet us at any of the IPG in-person events, then do get in touch. So thank you from us for attending. Is there some last words from IPG as well?
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. Imogen, shall I hand over to you if you want to say a word or two?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you to Tom and Daisy and obviously Elena for pulling together this really informative webinar, really, really useful and really great that people have engaged with questions as well. We, as Elena said, MUSO are IPG members, and they have kindly pulled together a sort of exclusive membership offer for you. So what will happen now is we will send you an email with details of the recording link, and we'll also include the link. You'll have to log in as an IPG member. And if you're not an IPG member, and you have joined today, that's absolutely fine, but obviously get in touch with us to join the IPG to get some get the benefit of the special offer. So it's a preferential rates for IPG members for the MUSO service. Obviously you may want to contact them directly if you've got sort of something bespoke that you would like to chat about, and I know that Tom and Daisy are more than happy to like Elena said, meet you in person, or to obviously have a chat after this session. So yes, just thank you again. We're thrilled that you're part of the IPG, and I hope everyone's found it really informative and interesting.
Absolutely, thank you all so much.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Bye-bye.